Before engines, before empires, before roads carved scars through the skin of the earth, there was silence, the wind sweeping across endless grass, herds moving like living storms, and somewhere a small cluster of humans, cold, hungry, fragile, watched from a distance. Today we see horses as partners, athletes, ornaments of human grace, but once they were the thunder we ran from, the blur we could never catch, the embodiment of everything wild, fast and free. And yet, in a moment lost to time, one person reached out, not with fear, but with wonder, not to kill, but to connect. That moment, quiet, trembling, unrecorded, changed humanity forever. It is the story of how one human first climbed onto a horse, and how that single act rewrote the rhythm of civilization. Because from that heartbeat onward, humanity would never move the same way again. The empty world. 6,000 years ago, the Eurasian steppe was a vast ocean of grass. From the Carpathians to Mongolia, it stretched unbroken, flat, fierce, and infinite. There were no roads, no kingdoms, no iron wheels, only wind, beasts, and wandering souls. Life here was survival stripped to its essence. The tribes hunted antelope, herded cattle, and competed with predators for meat and warmth. Fire was precious, so was speed. Whoever could move fast lived. But speed belonged to the horse. We call them equus ferus cabalus now, domesticated descendants of wild mares and stallions that roamed those plains. Back then, they were pure muscle and instinct herds that outran wolves and men alike. Humans followed their tracks for generations. They hunted them for food. They painted them on cave walls. They respected them, not as friends, but as gods of motion. And then, something changed. The Botai enigma, in the north of modern Kazakhstan along the Ashim River, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary. The villages of the Botai culture, dating between 3700 and 3100 BCE. At first glance, they looked ordinary pit houses, hearths, fragments of pottery. But inside those shards were microscopic traces of mare's milk fat, and around the settlements thousands of horse bones, not hunted, not scattered, managed. Then came the final clue. Horse teeth worn by something, foreign marks created by early bits, perhaps made of bone or plaited rope. Together these whispers said one thing. The Botai didn't just hunt horses, they rode them. That realization redefined prehistory. Before the wheel, before bronze, before writing someone had already bridged the gulf between species. No myth, no warlord, no king, just an ordinary prehistoric herder trying something no one else dared. Can you picture it? The first attempt. Maybe it happened at dawn. A young man stands beside a grazing mare. His people have watched this herd for seasons, feeding nearby, stealing foals, studying their movements like prayers to be memorized. He holds out his hand with a fistful of grass. The horse flinches but doesn't bolt. There's trust, tentative and trembling. He lays a hand on its shoulder, warm, alive, powerful. Days later, he tries again, and again, until one morning he swings a leg over its back. The air stops. The horse explodes in panic. He falls hard. The herd scatters in terror, but he tries again. And in one impossible instant, balance replaces chaos. Man and animal move together. They don't yet understand what they've done, but the horizon itself seems to widen. Because with that first ride, humanity discovered something bigger than speed. It discovered union. A new language. The first rider didn't use words. There was no command, no training manual, only gestures, tones, vibrations beneath muscle and bone. It was a language older than writing. Rhythm. Every hoofbeat became a heartbeat. Every sway of the horse's body, a pulse of connection. The Botai learned to guide with knees, with whispers, with trust. Slowly, mastery took shape where fear once lived. And out of that partnership came tools. The bit, the hide bridle, the rope halter. Not inventions of domination, but extensions of presence. The horse was no longer the hunted, it was the bridge between worlds. Soon, whole herds were tended instead of chased. Mares were milked. Foals were protected. Humans began to dream of distance beyond sight. The Botai never built monuments or empires, but they built something greater, the foundation of motion itself. The chain reaction. Innovation spreads like fire through dry grass. From the Botai steppes, knowledge began to move. East toward Mongolia, west toward Ukraine and the Carpathians, south toward Mesopotamia. Each culture took the idea and made it their own. The Sredni Stog, the Yamnaya, the mysterious Proto-Indo-Europeans. They all carried echoes of that first bond. Horses became trade, wealth and mobility. Families could herd larger flocks, migrate farther, survive leaner winters, but with mobility came ambition. A horse was no longer just a companion, it was a symbol of power. A man who could ride could command land, cattle, people. Speed became status, and slowly, inevitably, the gentle partnership that began in trust started to twist. The Age of Empires begins by 2000 BCE. The steppe erupted with movement tribes of riders, thundering across open ground, covering distances once thought impossible. The Indo-Europeans, whose languages would later become Sanskrit, Greek, Latin and English, spread across continents on horseback. They traded, fought and carried their gods westward. The horse became sacred. Poseidon was called Earth-shaker, not for the sea but for the tremor of hooves. In Vedic hymns, the Ashvins were twin horsemen, the first divine riders. To the Scythians, horses were so holy they were buried beside their masters. Each gallop etched new stories into the dust, and yet beneath every myth lay a simple truth. Humans had found a mirror of themselves in another being, proud, restless, unstoppable. The wheel and fire, but riders were just the beginning. Somewhere near the same steps, another revolution rolled into existence, the wheel, and when humans hitched horses to that invention, speed doubled again. The first chariots appeared around 2000 BCE in the Sintashta culture sleek wooden platforms pulled by teams of trained horses. They weren't for transport or farming, they were for war. It was the fusion of motion and violence. The Sumerians, the Hittites, the Egyptians all saw the transformation. Battles once fought at walking pace now raged with thunder. The warrior on foot was replaced by the horseman, the first elite, the first symbol of aristocratic might. From grace was born dominance, from cooperation control. The horse was no longer just life, it was strategy, myth and master. By the time of ancient Greece, the horse had become identity itself. From Pegasus to Bucephalus, its imagery symbolized transcendence, humanity's urge to rise above earth, and above all riders stood Alexander the Great, the boy who tamed the untamable stallion when others failed. He whispered, calmed, understood. He saw fear not as defiance, but confusion. And when Bucephalus trusted him, the world opened before them both. Their bond would conquer half the known world. But every legend carries darkness, because every empire that gallops forward leaves dust behind. The faster humanity moved, the farther it drifted from the humble beginning, the rider who sought connection, not conquest. The medieval tempest. By the Middle Ages, horses were no longer marvels, they were infrastructure. Knights defined cultures through their steeds. Entire social hierarchies were built around who could ride and who could not. The word chivalry itself came from cheval horse. To ride was to be noble, to walk was to be lesser. Horses ploughed fields, pulled wagons, and carried messengers, monks, merchants, kings. They connected villages to kingdoms, kingdoms to continents. But war once again dominated the relationship. The armoured warhorse, massive and bred for strength, became an instrument of destruction. Behind them, countless working horses laboured unseen pulling loads until exhaustion, dying nameless in mud. The partnership had grown powerful. but also one-sided. The Renaissance of elegance. Then came art. The Renaissance painted horses as divine muses, creatures that lifted man closer to heaven. Leonardo sketched their anatomy with reverence, calling the horse the measure of motion itself. Every tendon, every curve, captured the poetry of life in motion. Equestrian portraits dominated royal courts' kings, proving their mastery by posing atop them. To ride was no longer survival, it was spectacle. But in every painting, behind the pride, there's still that flicker of relationship, the subtle tension between command and companionship. Because deep down, even in power, humans remembered dependence. The horse carried us long before we carried empires. The industrial sunset then, in the blink of an age it ended. Engines arrived. Coal replaced hay. Steam replaced strength. The internal combustion engine silenced the world's hooves almost overnight. Where stables once echoed, garages now hummed. The partnership unravelled, not through betrayal, but through evolution. Horses were dismissed as obsolete, relics of a slower time. Millions, once essential, were abandoned, slaughtered, or forgotten. In the world wars they made one last tragic stand charging against machine guns, pulling artillery through mud, dying by the millions. No roar of an engine has ever matched that tragedy. The very species that gave us speed couldn't keep up with the machines we made from its gift. The modern echo. And yet, the horse didn't vanish. It adapted with quiet dignity. Today, horses live in sanctuaries, on ranches, in races, in therapy programs for veterans and children. They no longer carry our wars, they carry our healing. Humans rediscovered what the first rider already knew, that connection, not control, is what truly moves us forward. Equine therapy now helps those with trauma, anxiety, disconnection. Because horses read emotion without words, they remind us what empathy feels like. In every trembling student learning to ride for the first time, there echoes that same ancient heartbeat on the Kazakh plain. The metaphor of motion. Maybe that's the secret of the horse. It doesn't just carry us across distance, but through meaning. For the prehistoric herder, the horse was survival. For the warrior, power. For the modern dreamer, freedom. But beneath every version of the story lies the same act. Trust across difference. The rhythm of hooves teaches us patience, empathy, surrender. When we ride, we don't dominate, we dance. And in that dance, something of the prehistoric world still breathes with us. Remembering the first nameless soul. We'll never know who first climbed onto a wild horse. History didn't bother to write their name. But every parade, every race, every acceptance of motion owes them gratitude. They didn't do it for glory. They did it because curiosity is stronger than fear. Because somewhere inside every human is the desire to move beyond limits, to touch harmony with the wild. That moment didn't create just transportation, it created trust between species. It transformed the human story from walking to becoming. The philosophy of the rider. So what did humanity truly gain from that first ride? More than power, more than conquest. We learned rhythm, balance, the negotiation between chaos and grace. To ride is to surrender part of control, yet soar because of it. The horse demanded respect, not obedience. It asked us to listen, not with ears, but with muscles, intuition, silence. That lesson survives even in technology. The best machines are those that move with us, not against us. Maybe that first partnership was the template for everything we've built since ships, cars, rockets, all extensions of motion taught to us by the horse. The first rider didn't just mount a creature, they mounted the future. The tragic parallel. But every progress carries loss. For 6,000 years we lived in sync with our animals, our land, our limitations. Then within a century we detached faster, higher, louder, until the natural rhythm became noise. Perhaps that's why so many of us still dream of horses, still slow down to watch them run in films or fields. Because somewhere, beneath the concrete and circuits, we miss that connection. The first rider might look at us today and ask, "Did you forget the feeling of moving together?" We ride cars now, but something's missing, the heartbeat under your legs, the breath beside your own. Progress gave us speed, but not always direction. The return of the herd. Recently, archaeologists returned to the Botai sites with new tools, extracting DNA, reconstructing stories. They found that modern horses don't descend from Botai herds after all. The lineage diverged. That means the horses we ride today are the descendants of a second domestication, possibly in the western steppes around 2200 BCE. But the Botai attempt still mattered, because even though their line ended, their idea lived on. Domestication didn't happen once. It happened because humanity kept reaching out again and again. The idea of partnership proved too powerful to die. That persistence, that refusal to retreat from wonder, is what defines us as a species. The herd and the horizon. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Do you hear the wind through grass? The distant thunder that isn't a storm? That sound carried empires. It carried hopes, fears, dreams. It stitched continents together. And though we no longer depend on hooves, that sound still beats inside us. Every hum of an engine, every rhythm of a heartbeat on a mountain trail, it's the same tempo the first rider heard. It reminds us that progress is just inheritance, dressed in new skin. We are the descendants not only of farmers and hunters, but of riders and their horses. The lesson in the dust. So, what does the story of the first rider teach us? That courage sometimes looks like foolishness, that fear can become friendship, that the wild doesn't always need to be conquered, it can be collaborated with. In taming the horse, humanity tamed distance. But in trusting the horse, we found ourselves. That's the paradox of history. Every act of domination reveals a need for connection. The first rider didn't break a horse. They bridged a silence. And that bridge still stands, invisible yet indestructible, beneath every road, every journey, every story of movement. Epilogue. The sound of memory. The sun sets again over the Kazakh steppe. Shadows stretch long across the grass. A herd moves in the distance, manes catching light, muscles rolling like waves. Somewhere, a rider exhales. The horse snorts, listening. Together they move, no words, no fear, just motion. Thousands of years later, the world spins with machines, satellites, and steel. Yet none of them can replicate that first connection between flesh and spirit. Because riding a horse isn't about control, it's about trust. The same trust that created civilization itself. So when you hear the echo of hooves, remember, long before engines, before speed, before history itself, there was one small human hand reaching toward something wild. And that act, more than any invention after it, made us who we are. To ride is to remember. To remember is to be human.